Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Nos vemos otra vez este viernes, en las últimas sesiones ya de la mesa de madera. Carolina, los dejo contigo para que avancemos. Tenemos hartos temas hoy día que revisar.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos. Como saben y se les indicó en la sesión anterior, hoy día tenemos 3 invitados, 2 de ellos internacionales. Tuvimos en algún momento la posibilidad de escuchar al profesor James Dolan y contarnos todo el esquema que existía en Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Cómo se promocionaba la construcción en madera industrializada, y creemos pertinente también escuchar iniciativas que se estén llevando a cabo desde Reino Unido y desde Alemania. Por ello, quería comentarles que tenemos 2 invitados internacionales. Por una parte, Michael Ramatz, que ya está presente, y Alexander Gamp, desde Alemania. Ambos están presentes. Yo voy a compartir brevemente, quiero hacer muy brevemente esta introducción de la metodología que tenemos para llevar a cabo, ir haciendo seguimiento de sus recomendaciones. Hoy día vamos a trabajar en este punto, el número 3. La idea es que hoy día la sesión va a estar enfocada en que entendamos los diferentes incentivos, acciones y políticas que podamos llevar a cabo y que puedan ser promocionadas por medio de esta mesa, ya sea políticas desde el ámbito público, privado o la academia. Y para ello les voy a compartir rápidamente el link de este mural para que tengan acceso. No, si alguien me puede ayudar desde la parte y puede compartir el link del mural, sobre todo el equipo técnico que está ahí de backup de apoyo, para que puedan acceder a este. Como les comentaba, es muy importante que vayamos dejando las recomendaciones de ustedes. Ahí hay ciertas recomendaciones. Yo puse un ejemplo de una recomendación que podría ser incentivada desde ambos sectores, ya sea desde el sector público o privado, ¿verdad? Y que vayan dejando su sigla al final de la recomendación. ¿Okay? In order to start our presentation from our guests, I would like to, just let me a minute, okay. I would like to introduce our 2 guests that we have today. As I mentioned, Alexander Gamp from Germany, it is here. And we would like to thank Sebastián Hernández, que nos hizo toda la articulación para que Alex Gamp estuviese aquí presente. Y también está Michael Ramatz aquí presente, también en articulación con Eduardo Wigan, quien fue quien los invitó. Vamos a comenzar con la presentación de Michael Ramatz, que junto a Eduardo han preparado. Michael, what I am saying is that we are going to start with your presentation. Si hay alguien dentro de la mesa que tenga dificultades con tema de inglés, les agradecemos si pueden ir dejando sus consultas a través del chat. Yo no soy la más experta en el idioma, pero seguro aquí hay varios presentes que nos van a poder ayudar. Michael va a presentar junto con Eduardo y van a presentar sobre las diferentes iniciativas, políticas públicas e incentivos que se desarrollan desde Reino Unido. Para ello me gustaría dar una breve presentación sobre Michael Ramatz, quien dirige el Centro de Innovación de Materiales Naturales en la Universidad de Cambridge y es lector de Arquitectura e Ingeniería, profesor asociado en el Departamento de Arquitectura, miembro y vicerrector del Sydney Success College y miembro colegiado de la Institución de Estructuras Estructurales. Hoy día Michael desarrolla investigación que se centra en el desarrollo de materiales y sistemas estructurales de baja energía en mampostería, mejores viviendas en el mundo en desarrollo y edificios de gran altura a gran escala en ingeniería y bambú a través de la innovación de materiales. Junto con Michael estará Eduardo, quien también complementará esa presentación, Eduardo Wigan, que es arquitecto chileno con experiencia y líder en equipos de diseño interdisciplinario y proyectos de I+D+I. Ha colaborado con la academia, con instituciones gubernamentales y la industria en el desarrollo de sistemas constructivos, materiales innovadores y políticas sostenibles, y ha estado investigando este último tiempo sobre la prefabricación y sistemas de construcción en base a madera, ya sea en altura o mediana altura. Para ello, damos el pase a que Michael, if you feel free, you can start sharing your screen. And if you need any help, you can mention to us.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to share our work. Can I just confirm that you can see the first slide?
Yes, now it is correct in passing your slide. Okay, we are ready. Thank you, Michael.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And we're happy to remain available after today's session. I will give a general overview to the work we're doing and why we think it's so important. And Eduardo will speak to the specifics of some of the policy instruments that we've been working on. This is just a quick overview of where we'll go, and end with some possible recommendations for Chilean policy. I lead the Center for Natural Material Innovation at Cambridge University, where we work with timber and bamboo to use alternatives for steel and concrete to lessen the impact of the built environment on the natural environment. And we look forward to a future where instead of extracting minerals from our heroic past, we have a future where we cultivate the building materials and grow them for a more sustainable way of building our cities and preserving our environments. And we look to a future where we'll replace buildings going up all over the world, such as those on the left, out of reinforced concrete, with buildings like that on the right, the third tallest building in Norway, made out of timber at 18 stories. And of course, we can only do this if we have a proper appreciation for forestry and for the mutually beneficial and supportive relationship between the ecology of forests and the economics of construction. So this means proper stewardship for people, communities, and the environment. And one of the questions that my daughters always ask me is, do we have enough trees? Because cutting trees down is incredibly emotive, although we know that these are trees that were in many cases planted as crops. But we need to make sure this is a good idea. In order to make an apartment of about 100 square meters, in Europe at the moment, that takes about 30 cubic meters of cross-laminated timber. As we get more efficient, we'll use less, I suspect. But to give you a sense, this is the amount of wood that grows in a plot 40 meters by 40 meters over 50 years. And the numbers at the bottom are the production of Canada's sustainable harvest, 220 million cubic meters of timber each year. Over 70 years, which is roughly the lifetime of a building, also roughly the lifetime of a human. That's 15 billion cubic meters, which is enough to house 1 billion people in perpetuity. So, of course, all this wood doesn't go to cross-laminated timber and other housing woods, but you can see that the scope of material available is extremely large and therefore suitable for transforming the way we build. And timber, of course, is very light as compared to steel and concrete, and strength for weight. Softwood is as strong as steel, and it's much stronger than concrete. So the structural properties are not in question, and the environmental properties are equally good. The building that's grayed out in the background is a 4-story residential building here in Cambridge, built for students. It was built in timber with 126 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emitted, but it was also designed in concrete and steel to compare the emissions. And the concrete building had 2.5 times as many emissions of embodied carbon dioxide, and the steel had almost 4 times as much embodied carbon dioxide. And this is before we take into account that every kilogram of timber holds 1.8 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And this is because nature is much more efficient than our industrial processes, and it only stores the carbon, giving the oxygen back to us to breathe. So that same building in Cambridge has stored in its 300 cubic meters of timber about 540 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And where we need to go is a way to recognize that storage, because if we were to build every single one of the 340,000 houses that that England needs each year, we'd be able to store something like 9 million tons of CO2 equivalent each year. So the opportunity is large, and there are good reasons to do it. And I will now stop sharing, and Eduardo can say something a little bit about the very specifics of what we're looking at and how they relate to Chilean policy, or possible Chilean policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, Eduardo. Are you there? Yes. Brilliant. Eduardo, no te podemos escuchar.
¿Ahí?
Sí, ahora sí, perfecto.
¿Pueden ver la presentación bien?
Sí, Eduardo, la vemos bien.
Perfecto. Bueno, como comentó Carolina, mi nombre es Eduardo Vigan, soy estudiante de doctorado por la Universidad de Cambridge en el Centro de Innovación de Materiales Naturales. Primero que nada agradezco a Carolina y a este comité por la invitación a presentar en esta importante iniciativa. Yo complementaré la presentación de Michael introduciendo las principales brechas y problemas de la industria de la construcción en madera, para luego abordar cómo las políticas públicas han apoyado a la industria para superar estos desafíos. Finalmente presentaré brevemente una serie de recomendaciones basadas en la efectividad de dichas políticas. Primero que nada me gustaría mencionar que no voy a profundizar en las ventajas y beneficios de la madera, sino que más bien voy a presentar un análisis de la literatura enfocado en entender de qué manera muchas barreras y dificultades impiden capitalizar estas ventajas desde los puntos de vista político, económico, social y técnico. En relación a los factores políticos, primero, los marcos regulatorios no tienen debidamente en cuenta el carbono absorbido por la madera en los sistemas de certificación. En segundo lugar, varios estudios sugieren que los distintos actores de la industria perciben el uso de madera, exigiendo requisitos adicionales, especialmente a edificios en altura. Tercero, el cumplimiento de parámetros basados en el desempeño requiere la realización de pruebas, ensayos, simulaciones o estudios muy costosos. Por último, la heterogeneidad de los estándares regulatorios y su interpretación diversa restringen el uso generalizado de madera, especialmente en estructuras muy altas. Las barreras económicas más relevantes pueden explicarse por la madurez relativamente baja de la industria. Hay datos limitados sobre el rendimiento de la construcción de madera en altura, por lo tanto, hay incertidumbre con respecto a su durabilidad. Esta situación, junto con las percepciones erróneas, resultan en seguros innecesarios de alto riesgo. Además, muchos costos adicionales inciertos desincentivan el uso de madera en construcción. Muchos otros estudios argumentan que una mayor demanda de madera para otros fines, como embalaje y combustible, pueden generar precios más altos. Finalmente, la competencia limitada en los mercados mantiene también los costos más altos. En relación a las barreras sociales se puede mencionar, primero, falta de información. En segundo lugar, la madera se percibe inferior al acero y al hormigón. Tercero, la actitud conservadora del sector y la preferencia por las prácticas establecidas y la falta de apertura es una barrera relevante. Por último, la mayor demanda de edificios de madera puede ser rechazada debido a preocupaciones de sustentabilidad del material. Finalmente, los problemas técnicos son barreras también muy difíciles de superar. En primer lugar, la industria de la construcción con madera está menos desarrollada, lo que resulta en niveles más bajos de experiencia. La falta de conocimiento y experiencia puede explicarse en parte por una educación insuficiente, falta de mano de obra calificada y escasez de contratistas, por ejemplo. Además, los estándares heterogéneos afectan el uso generalizado de madera. Junto a esto, la información disponible sobre el tema es bastante limitada. Finalmente, numerosas barreras pueden explicarse por la fragmentación de la cadena de suministro, lo que contribuye a una orientación del mercado de corto plazo. Si bien muchas de estas barreras o problemas pueden solucionarse parcialmente a nivel de la industria, las políticas públicas pueden influir significativamente en el desarrollo de proyectos. A continuación presentaré los resultados de una investigación recientemente publicada que busca entender el impacto de las políticas públicas en edificios de madera. Es importante destacar que esta investigación se enfocó en edificios de más de 6 pisos, lo que permitió incluir la muestra prácticamente completa de los proyectos de estas características. Para entender el impacto de las políticas públicas, se entrevistó a profesionales del sector privado y desarrolladores de políticas públicas. Se abordaron muchos temas, sin embargo, las entrevistas tenían como propósito principal entender cómo las políticas han promovido o facilitado el desarrollo de proyectos en los que los entrevistados habían estado involucrados. Dado que el interés era analizar y comparar las políticas públicas, estas se clasificaron de acuerdo a las siguientes categorías. Primero, los instrumentos regulatorios que establecen la obligación de cumplir con un estándar o utilizar una tecnología específica. Segundo, los instrumentos voluntarios que se refieren a la adopción unilateral de una política por parte de una empresa. Instrumentos económicos son básicamente incentivos financieros. En cuarto lugar, las herramientas de investigación y desarrollo se basan en una asociación público-privada que compromete fondos públicos para apoyar actividades de innovación. Finalmente, las herramientas de información tienen como objetivo comunicar información relevante sobre temas de sostenibilidad. En los países analizados, cada política se clasificó según los criterios. De manera complementaria, se analizó cómo las políticas públicas promovieron el desarrollo de los proyectos seleccionados. Para ejemplificar lo anterior, voy a presentar brevemente el caso de Canadá, en que fue posible determinar la influencia de 7 políticas públicas en el desarrollo de 6 edificios. Sin embargo, a nivel mundial se identificaron más de 30 políticas públicas. El análisis de los países restantes lo pueden encontrar en el artículo. Sin embargo, es importante mencionar que se encontraron muchos patrones similares. A la izquierda se observa una tabla de las políticas implementadas en Canadá, su descripción y clasificación de acuerdo a las categorías presentadas anteriormente. Y a la derecha, los edificios desarrollados. Para entender los mecanismos de acción detrás de las políticas, ahora presentaré los instrumentos implementados en Canadá. En primer lugar, es importante entender que la regulación limita la altura de las estructuras de madera hasta 6 pisos. Edificios más altos requieren demostrar el cumplimiento de criterios de desempeño, lo que obliga a desarrollar un número de pruebas, ensayos, simulaciones y estudios. En este contexto, y a nivel local, en el distrito de British Columbia, se implementó la iniciativa Wood First Act en el año 2009. Esta política promovió el uso de madera y exigía su uso en edificios financiados de manera pública. En este contexto, se desarrolló el primer edificio de 6 pisos en el país que se ve a la izquierda arriba. En la misma provincia, el edificio Brook Commons de 18 pisos se desarrolló como resultado de la iniciativa Talwood Building Demonstration Initiative, una política basada en múltiples instrumentos de manera simultánea. Esta iniciativa entregó asistencia técnica, financió pruebas para lograr el cumplimiento de la norma y para mejorar técnicas constructivas. En Quebec, otra provincia de Canadá, 2 políticas públicas apoyaron un proyecto de 13 pisos llamado Origin. El apoyo consistía básicamente en financiar las actividades de innovación necesarias para demostrar la seguridad contra incendios y los valores acústicos requeridos por la norma. Los resultados de los procesos de demostración desarrollados para Origin fueron publicados en la guía RBQ. Este documento incluye soluciones técnicas y legales que fueron utilizadas por la misma empresa para desarrollar un proyecto de 8 pisos que se ve a la izquierda. Posteriormente, el gobierno canadiense implementó el programa JCGood. Este programa buscaba influir en las edificaciones de los códigos de construcción y promover actividades educativas avanzadas. Esta iniciativa apoyó económicamente un edificio de 14 pisos. El proyecto recibió soporte principalmente económico y técnico para su desarrollo y para el cumplimiento del código. Esta iniciativa también apoyó un proyecto de 12 pisos. Los recursos obtenidos financiaron servicios profesionales adicionales para producir informes de cumplimiento de la norma estructural y de resistencia al fuego. Estos fondos también apoyaron pruebas de constructibilidad adicionales, visitas a plantas de fabricación para ayudar a tomar decisiones informadas. Finalmente, es importante destacar que 2 legisladores indicaron que algunas de estas políticas y proyectos influyeron en las ediciones de códigos en Canadá y Estados Unidos para permitir edificios de manera prescriptiva de estructuras hasta 18 pisos. En cada país estudiado, las políticas que se implementaron fueron particulares. Sin embargo, los instrumentos utilizados fueron bastante similares. En relación a los instrumentos regulatorios, el principal y más relevante es la adopción de códigos por desempeño en los años 90. Junto a la eliminación de restricciones específicas, es lo que posibilita, en primera instancia, el uso de madera en edificios. Los instrumentos voluntarios estuvieron principalmente asociados a fondos concursables para obtener apoyo estatal. Además, evaluaciones medioambientales voluntarias incentivaron el desarrollo de algunos proyectos específicos. Los instrumentos económicos fueron básicamente subsidios monetarios, mientras que en relación a los instrumentos de investigación y desarrollo, estos estaban relacionados con apoyar los procesos de aprobación por parte de las autoridades y para mejorar procesos constructivos. Finalmente, los instrumentos informativos más relevantes fueron certificaciones, campañas informativas, apoyo técnico y educativo y la publicación de guías técnicas. Sin embargo, el resultado más importante de la investigación está relacionado con la sinergia entre todas las políticas. Todas actúan de manera simultánea para ayudar a superar brechas específicas. De esta manera, la aprobación por desempeño posibilita el desarrollo de proyectos en primer lugar. Luego, a través de concursos voluntarios, se financian actividades de innovación y desarrollo que al mismo tiempo permiten conseguir los permisos de edificación por desempeño. Luego aparecen los precedentes que promueven los cambios normativos y el desarrollo de otros proyectos. Para reafirmar lo anterior, esta tabla muestra la distribución de edificios completados desde 2008. La altura pasó de 8 a 24 pisos en 12 años. En general, se observó que el apoyo era más necesario a medida que se aumentaba la altura o cuando se realizaban los primeros edificios demostrativos al interior de cada país. Edificios consecutivos, y esto es muy importante, tienden a ser más competitivos, por lo tanto, tienden a requerir de menor apoyo público. Más que hacer recomendaciones específicas, ya que se pueden extraer de los resultados presentados, me gustaría insistir en algunos aspectos que aumentarían la efectividad de las políticas ya presentadas. Primero, es importante realizar un diagnóstico de la situación nacional para entender las brechas y las respectivas políticas públicas a ser aplicadas. Y en segundo lugar, me gustaría insistir en la importancia de implementar distintos instrumentos complementarios de manera simultánea para cubrir las brechas que dificultan el uso de madera. En tercer lugar, el apoyo público debería obligar o incentivar varios aspectos. En primer lugar, colaboración con centros de investigación, especialmente en edificios pioneros o demostrativos. Segundo, y probablemente lo más importante, incentivar la colaboración de empresas involucradas en distintas etapas de la cadena de valor. Condicionar algún tipo de apoyo a alianzas estratégicas entre privados. Tercero, desarrollar políticas públicas vinculadas a la construcción de proyectos, de manera de generar precedentes y formar cambios normativos y culturales. Y cuarto, como resultado de proyectos apoyados por el sector público, asegurarse que la información técnica quede disponible para posteriormente ser difundida. Y para terminar esta presentación, nos gustaría insistir en dos políticas fundamentales asociadas a las emisiones del sector construcción. Primero, se debe exigir una evaluación del ciclo de vida completo de los materiales de construcción en edificaciones. Y segundo, el gobierno debería comprar el carbono almacenado en edificios de madera y afirmar que el carbono capturado es una contribución determinada a nivel nacional en virtud del acuerdo de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático y establecer un mercado de carbono en el que se pueda comercializar. Esto podría definitivamente impulsar el uso de madera en construcción. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Thank you very much, Michael and Eduardo. Nos han puesto muchos temas sobre la mesa. Yo creo que las preguntas pueden ser muchísimas y quisiera dejar este espacio antes de que pasemos al caso alemán. Así que agradezco a quienes quieran ir pidiendo palabra y hacer preguntas a nuestros invitados. De no existir hasta el momento una pregunta, a mí me gustaría formular una. Michael y Eduardo, it is really impressive, all the different actions that the actors and the countries have developed in order to promote the use of wood and timber in construction. You present us this picture where all the different initiatives and drivers, as you mentioned, have to be coordinated in order to really grab the benefits of use of wood and promote wood. There is a kind of governance, how you coordinate all the different actors from the public, private, and academia sector. How is the experience that you gathered during your research? How each country developed this kind of governance? Maybe Michael can share that with us, related with United Kingdom. And if the country defined a kind of goal that they would like to achieve in a rate of years, according to net zero, or according to the use of wood in a number of that you can quantify.
Thank you for the question. I will start and Eduardo can answer as well. In the United Kingdom, as I'm sure you all know, we don't have a very active wood products industry, and we don't have very many forests. But we do have a government that has some quite serious carbon net zero targets, and it's the environment has certainly been on various policymakers' minds for a number of years. And so some of the first timber buildings in the United Kingdom were possible because of climate change policy, not because of timber policy specifically. And I think that's actually quite important. I don't know. Certainly in the United Kingdom, there's a reluctance to, shall we say, anoint or specify a particular material. There's much more desire to specify a kind of performance or goal, and then timber is one way to answer that question, and a good way to answer that question. And so lowering the carbon emissions of buildings. We've also seen examples where buildings out of timber are allowed to be taller than buildings out of other materials because they're perceived to be better for the environment. So that's one way to incentivize them. So I think in many ways that was the approach in the UK. We have a different problem at the moment. A few years ago, there was a terrible fire in central London in a high-rise building, which had nothing to do with timber, but it has changed policies around combustible materials, and structural timber has fallen into that. So that's a different, that's a very UK-specific problem that we're working on independently at the moment.
Thank you, Michael. Eduardo, maybe you can answer one of the questions regarding to governance. How Canada have implemented the governance in order to gather all and trigger all these actions that you mentioned?
Para complementar lo que decía Michael, el esquema ese que era circular y que se mostraba en la lámina, uno podría señalar que se refiere a 7 países analizados, a excepción del Reino Unido. El Reino Unido en general no es tan intervencionista. Sin embargo, las políticas más efectivas en el Reino Unido que se pudieron demostrar eran a través de campañas informativas. Muchas campañas informativas implementadas a nivel local, principalmente en el municipio de Hackney, resultó en la construcción de 5 de los 7 edificios más altos de Inglaterra. O sea, desde ese punto de vista es importante mencionar que únicamente a través de campañas informativas se pueden lograr resultados bastante importantes. En relación a los otros temas, en general hay políticas implementadas a nivel nacional que están asociadas con marcos regulatorios y financiamiento de I+D, pero al mismo tiempo estas se complementan con políticas implementadas a nivel local, como educación, competencias por fondos, visitas a fábricas, etc. Entonces uno podría decir que de alguna manera todas estas políticas implementadas al mismo tiempo es lo que facilitan de alguna manera acortar las brechas que existen en cada país. Sin embargo, la profundidad con que cada uno de estos instrumentos fueron aplicados es distinta en cada país. Y para eso sería muy interesante que revisaran el artículo, porque aun cuando yo comenté que de manera general se implementaron todas estas políticas, la profundidad, por ejemplo, en algunos países de campañas informativas es mucho más importante. En los países escandinavos la investigación también fue mucho más fuerte. En otros países se necesitaba más capacitación, por lo tanto las políticas iban más por ese lado.
Ok, leeremos el artículo. Eduardo, tengo al menos 3 preguntas. La primera la desarrolla Gustavo Durán. Quizás, Gustavo, quieras hacerla tú literalmente o quieres que yo la pregunte. Ahí está, Gustavo. Luego sigue Mario Lara, Frane y Rosemary. Y con eso pasamos al siguiente expositor. Gracias, Gustavo.
Gracias a ti, Carolina. Eduardo, no, es muy sencillo. Lo que pasa es que en tu presentación tú planteaste que en el fondo el análisis, digamos, el análisis de servicio para la aprobación de los proyectos, en el fondo fue lo que de una u otra forma abrió el camino para poder utilizar la madera como elemento, como material de construcción. Quisiera saber, de la experiencia que has podido recoger, en el fondo, cómo se dio ese cambio, digamos, en el paradigma. En la situación chilena, por lo menos hoy día en lo que refiere a fuego, el análisis que se hace para los permisos siempre ha sido prescriptivo. Nosotros se sigue una receta, básicamente. Y eso obviamente que nos cierra la puerta, en el fondo, a cualquier tipo de experimentación.
Esa es una muy buena pregunta. Durante la mayor parte del siglo XX habían restricciones explícitas al uso de madera en edificaciones de más de 2 o 3 pisos. Y solo se podían utilizar soluciones prescriptivas. Sin embargo, desde los años 90, como mencioné durante la presentación, existía la alternativa de cumplir con los estándares en la medida en que se demostrara el cumplimiento por desempeño. Al aparecer esa alternativa, la posibilidad de edificios en altura en madera se hacen posible. Pero eso no quiere decir que se desarrollaran inmediatamente. Para que eso ocurriera, tuvo que haber un apoyo importante de parte del gobierno en investigación y desarrollo para poder demostrar que la madera se comporta apropiadamente y es capaz de competir con los otros materiales y cumplir, por supuesto, con la normativa.
Okay.
No sé si respondí tu pregunta.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Creo que ya nos vas dibujando el camino. Mario Lara, sigues tú con tu pregunta.
Gracias, Carolina. My question is to Michael. And this question looking forward rather than backwards in a way. So regarding government-led policies, clearly COP is a platform to influence government and the agenda of governments and policies. It doesn't appear to be mentioned or being discussed greatly currently. Chile is able to influence that agenda. Chile has the ability to be part of that conversation. So my question to you, Michael, is how do you think we as a country could use that opportunity the best to influence globally, to get support to develop policies around the use of not just timber, but also introduce circularity, carbon emissions, and so forth?
Thanks for the question. It's a great question, and it's a really important topic. I think one of the things that we feel is very important, and if Chile can influence this, it would be wonderful, is to get national credit, carbon storage credits for construction in timber. If these are included in the carbon calculations that every nation must do, we think that will both help very much with timber construction, but it will also help very much with the circularity, because one only gets credit for carbon that is verifiable and long term. And of course, building with timber is immediately verifiable, and the only way for it to be long term is through a circular approach to building. So if those two things are implemented as giving carbon credits to governments, I think that would really change things. And it I'm not entirely sure it's a huge, I mean, it would make a huge change. I'm not sure it's a big policy shift. If we look back briefly to burning wood for power, which I personally think is a bad idea. It's not a good use of our trees, especially if we cut them down to burn them rather than burning waste wood. But that policy change for counting that as carbon neutral is very new, and it opened an entire market for wood pellets, such that trees are cut down in the southern United States and turned into pellets that are burned here in England for notionally carbon neutral power. I'm not convinced that's true, and I think there's quite a lot of scientific evidence that that's not true. But that is a sort of a carbon trading based policy that drove that industry. I think I'd like to see a carbon trading based policy that drove something much more productive, such as buildings.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Fran Silit, it's your turn.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Eduardo. Thank you for your presentation. I think that there might be another barrier that might influence the outcome. The relative importance of construction in concrete and in timber is absolutely different. Concrete, you can only make construction out of concrete. Mostly, it's the main business. And in timber, you can do many other things. So there isn't so much of a pressure from the sector to be able to take this construction sector, and the fear of losing it from the concrete sector might be very big. So I wonder if that is a barrier that you have noticed or that you have seen in action in the course of implementing policies around, or in England or anywhere else.
that's a really, really important point. Thank you for raising it. We've seen it in some of the work we've done on engineered bamboo as a structural material. Bamboo, as you all know, grows very quickly, and it's very easily turned into flooring in China, which is sold all over the world. And the margins on making bamboo flooring are very, very small, but the volume is incredibly large. So it's relatively straightforward to make a profit. It's definitely not the most high value or even necessarily the best use for engineered bamboo, but the incentive to change is tiny because there is no market yet for engineered bamboo as a building material. And I think we see something very similar based on what you've just said about timber having so many uses. And we see it, we actually see it currently in the UK. There's such a building boom that nobody wants to make cross-laminated timber, although you can do it with UK timber. It's much easier just to sell it to the as 2x4s for regular building materials. So we see that that's a role that we as academics can help to intervene on, showing how to link those things, and we think it's a role that government can help to intervene on, because it's not that the market doesn't exist for timber buildings, but it needs a bit of a push to make it big enough that it's seen as the place where you should invest, I think, as a company, so that timber buildings really are seen to be the way that timber is best used, and it makes sense. I mean, that it of course has to make economic sense for companies, and it doesn't yet at the moment at a very large scale. And I think it should, and I think that's one of the roles of public policies is to find ways to incentivize that so that the wood goes to its highest value use.
Ok, thank you, Michael. Rosemary, la última pregunta para este capítulo y luego pasamos al siguiente invitado.
Ok, gracias, Carolina. Mi pregunta es para Eduardo y se trata de esto. En el mundo de la industria maderera existe desde toda la vida, en realidad, la modalidad de comprar paquetes tecnológicos completos, incluidos los planos y todo, porque la industria cuando adquiere, por ejemplo, un nuevo proceso productivo, trae a equipos desde afuera, desde el país donde se originan, a todo el equipo técnico para la instalación de la puesta en marcha de todo el proceso. Entonces, basado en ese principio, y ¿es posible o conoces algún modelo en el que exista la venta de un edificio? ¿Por qué digo esto? Porque a nosotros nos falta bastante para llegar a construir edificios que tengan los estándares que se están consiguiendo afuera. Entonces, una modalidad que tampoco hemos incursionado en Chile es la posibilidad de comprar esta especie como de paquete tecnológico que incluya los planos, el asesoramiento técnico, etcétera, y que nos permitiría como país presentar licitaciones de edificaciones de estas características. Estoy entendiendo claramente que hay adecuaciones que hacer, ¿ya? En términos de los criterios técnicos, pero básicamente esto es como importar un edificio y que nos dé la posibilidad del aseguramiento en términos de las confianzas que se necesitan para la ejecución y la adaptación en el mercado local. Esa es más o menos la pregunta, Eduardo.
Me parece que es una muy buena pregunta, pero como comenté en alguna parte de la presentación, las regulaciones y los estándares en todos los países son muy distintos. Por lo tanto, un elemento, un sistema constructivo o incluso un edificio que cumple la normativa en un lugar, puede que instalado de la misma manera no la cumpla en otro. Eso hace que sea muy difícil exportar, como tú dirías, un edificio completo con todas sus especificaciones. Sin embargo, esto de alguna manera es un poco más fácil en regiones en que existen acuerdos en que se pueden convalidar este tipo de regularizaciones o más bien soluciones, como por ejemplo en la Comunidad Europea. Cuando el Reino Unido formaba parte de la Comunidad Europea, para muchos edificios no fue necesario hacer todo este paquete de pruebas y de ensayos, ya que se convalidaron ensayos realizados en otros países de la Comunidad Europea, por lo tanto fue posible hacer lo que tú comentas. Sin embargo, si uno quisiera hacer eso con Chile, yo me imagino que no sería tan sencillo. Habría que revisarlo bien. Y probablemente sería bastante más complicado para otros países de Latinoamérica. Sin embargo, entiendo que algunas empresas, y entiendo que aquí está Sebastián Hernández de Stora Enso, ofrecen de alguna manera este apoyo. Entiendo que empresas como Stora Enso, KLH, ya ofrecen cierto tipo de asistencia durante el diseño, construcción, y también están integrados de alguna manera con los bosques y de alguna manera han integrado, han hecho alianzas entre distintos actores involucrados en la cadena de valor. Pero es una muy buena pregunta, pero lo veo difícil actualmente para Chile. Una opinión personal en todo caso.
Creo que no nos vamos a poder saltar el trabajo que tenemos que hacer. A propósito que mencionaste a Sebastián Hernández, quisiera comenzar agradeciendo a Sebastián Hernández, que está ahí, acaba de prender su cámara, por habernos articulado nuestro próximo invitado, Alexander Gamp. Alexander Gamp, voy a leerles su pequeña biografía porque creo que es muy interesante saber que él completó su estudio como carpintero en 1987 y se graduó como ingeniero estructural en la TU de Múnich en 1993. El mismo año fundó una empresa de construcción y prefabricación de madera que lo llevó a su actual cargo de CEO de Gamp & Mayer. Ha liderado su crecimiento durante casi 3 décadas hasta convertirse en una de las empresas de construcción de madera más influyentes al sur de Alemania, con 115 empleados y una facturación anual de 29 millones de euros. Además de su puesto en el sector privado, ha estado activo en investigación y desarrollo de al menos 12 proyectos internacionales y es miembro de algunas de las instituciones más influyentes para la promoción, representación y órganos de formulación de políticas que fomentan la construcción en madera en Alemania. Actualmente es el presidente de ProHolz Bayern. Desde el 2012 participa en los comités de normas, es vicepresidente de la Asociación de Carpinteros de Baviera y director de Information Bearingholz, espero no equivocarme en la pronunciación, y muchos otros. Alexander, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you very much. And if you are ready, you can start sharing your screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to admit I was completely lost the last hour, the most time when you spoke Spanish.
I was just introducing you, Alexander.
Yeah, I know. I understand a little bit. I had to work, I was allowed to work a couple of years together with Sebastian, and I learned a few words. Do you see my screen?
No, I think that we...
Okay, I know.
Yet?
Now you should. Which
yes,
one?
And we are seeing your screen in edit mode, not in presentation mode.
Yeah, but now.
I'm going to tell you.
Now it's fine, is it?
We still see your screen in edition mode, not in presentation, in PowerPoint presentation mode. Maybe you can another screen.
You could stop sharing and then you need to share again, but choose another screen.
Yes, the presentation mode screen. We can wait. Don't
okay, we will see.
Now it's perfect.
Okay.
Maybe you can go to the first slide because we are seeing, I think that...
Yeah, I know. Let's see. The problem is I got a presentation which is automatically, and I haven't checked it, but we will manage it.
Brilliant. We are ready.
Yeah. Okay, then I will tell you a lot. Sebastian, can you help me with this bloody presentation. Let's do another thing. Sorry for this.
Don't worry. Just feel free to share with us your experience and.
Yeah. What I want to do now is. No, I'm completely lost. Here is it. No. I never find the meet.
Sharing your web WhatsApp. If you stop
Sebastian, can you help me with sharing your? I think you have the same same presentation.
Maybe Sebastian can share the presentation.
Yeah,
and
that's what I
share your presentation. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. And then I can tell you.
Give me 1 minute, please.
Okay, but maybe I will start with words because Sebastian told me tell your story or tell a story what happens in Germany, what are the success factors, what happened the last 30 years. I didn't understand Spanish, and so I read a little bit the introduction in English, which was given from Sebastian to my person. I think you're quite fine with it. We are a timber construction company in Germany. Therefore, good evening and not good afternoon. It's 8:30 at the evening in Germany. We are working with about 120 employees. We have a turnover about 29 million for this year. Now you see the presentation?
Yes, but Sebastián está en modo edición.
Yeah, but let's leave it like that. If not,
okay.
Brilliant.
So you see here what we are doing. We have two brands for private customers where we're building a very sophisticated single family houses and mainly turnkey projects. We have our brands for business customers. The hugest one is Gumbel projects, where we do the huge timber construction buildings, and we are very very active in research and development. We are a member of different research projects. You see a couple of these here. We have at the moment, which is very important, all the fire things, which is Tim Pulse, which goes about the fire protection for multi-story buildings. And the other one is BIM Wood. That means digitalization in the building process, in the planning process. And you see, we are with 120 employees. We are in international context a relatively small company. If you go to the German structures, and especially to the structures in German, Austria, Switzerland, which are very similar, we are one of the bigger companies. So we have not an industry. We have it's a business which is done mainly by small and medium enterprises, which I think is, I will refer on it later on, which is a key factor of success for whole timber construction. Sebastian, can you take the next slide? You see here our factory in Binswangen, which is near, okay, we're talking to Chile, which is near Munich. It's comparable to Puerto Montt on the other half. Next slide, Sebastian. Here we have a few slides of our prefabrication line of our production facility. It's all digitalized, and I think at the moment we have one of the most sophisticated production lines especially in Germany. Okay, next one, Sebastian. Looking back nearly 30 years, where we started with timber, not with timber construction, but with housing. I was a skilled carpenter and a very young engineer, and I think we had relatively clear ideas and a clear strategy, and we developed a brand new technology together with others. You see, it was an ecologic technology, and it was sustainable over the whole life cycle. And it was no CLT. So we spoke, that's what I want to refer at first. If at the moment, if the whole world speaks about timber construction, most people have CLT constructions in mind. And for me, CLT is only a material and nothing else. And we have to design and build intelligent structures, and that means for me, use only that much material you have to use for the challenge you have to tackle. That's intelligent construction, and not use everywhere mass timber. My philosophy is do a huge number of buildings with relatively small amount of timber in each building, which is much more sustainable than put as much as you can into one building. But you see, here we have what we have 1994, ecologic, sustainable over the life cycle, end. That was the idea 1994 where we started this business. Next slide, please, Sebastian. It's not, and we tested it. You see my own house. The picture was done 25 years ago. We started experiencing at the own buildings, not make experiments with clients. At the time we built this building, it was 20 years beyond building standards. So it was built in 1995, and it achieves still the energy consumption requirements of 2016. Next slide, Sebastian. How was the situation in Germany in the 90s? Materials. What materials did we have for timber construction? Yes, new products as KBH, Constructions, Vollholz for the Europeans developed, OSB developed, and all these things developed. A lot of new materials started in the 90s to develop. What about the people's ecosystem? And there we have something in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, which in my opinion could be copied all over the world. We have a lot of things in Germany which shouldn't be copied otherwise, but this is one which could be copied. It's called Duales Bildungssystem. Maybe Sebastian can explain you later on in Spanish what it means. That means we have a system where carpenters or craftsmen get a really good education in the companies and in the schools, and so we get very qualified workers, carpenters, craftsmen, which is extremely necessary to develop intelligent buildings, because you need the engineers and you need the people who work by hand, and they should work together. And this is one of the best things we have in these three countries. And maybe it's a reason why we are very, very, I would say, in front concerning timber construction. Building codes at this time were very easy, because they were only, at this time, they have been only national and not European, but they had huge restrictions for timber buildings. Only single family houses and terraced houses were possible at this time beginning of the 90s. Looking at the market, the environmental thinking starts in parts of the society at this time. We had and a small market for sustainable building developed. The driver was Chernobyl 1986. Some of you might remember this explosion of the nuclear plant in Ukraine, and the acid rain we had in Germany, which destroyed parts of the forest and came from pollution. And the public policy at this time, I would say it slept. Okay, that was the situation in the 1990s. Where we are now. Sebastian, could you? Next slide. These are standard buildings we do meanwhile. And these are all Gumbel-Meyer projects, but it's other companies do the same projects. That's the smaller single family houses. The next might be more interesting. Sebastian, the next, please. That's a huge development we did a couple of years ago in Frankfurt. It seems to be still the largest active house in the world. I don't know. The architects tell it and the client always tells it. So next slide, Sebastian. This is a new construction we already finished in Munich. It's a 5-story building complete, made of timber with concrete staircases, the rest floors and everything of timber, and not mass timber. All the walls are timber frame. So that's where we are at the moment in Germany. This is the type of timber construction which is common in the market. And how has the situation changed? Sebastian, next slide, please. Let's start with the public policy. Except of the corona crisis at the moment, climate protection is the main topic in German society. And there was a really forwarding judgment of the name is das Deutsche Verfassungsgericht, maybe it's a German constitutional court, 2 weeks ago, which forced the government to fulfill their climate goals, and now and not later. And that's for me a really, really forwarding judgment. And this has big impact actually for building industry. And the German building industry is responsible for 60% of the waste and 40% of the CO2 emissions in Germany. And I think in other years, Michael, I think in the UK, will be more or less same. And this is now in Germany, it's common knowledge. So 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was always knowledge for specialists, but now it's common knowledge. And I'm sure within 3 or 4 years, we will have obligational life cycle calculations and CO2 taxes on materials. That's the simplest way and the only way, and it's the best way that every material pays its pollution. People ecosystem, we still have our duales Bildungssystem, and I think that's also the reason why the timber construction, especially in Germany, had such a development in the last 25 to 30 years. In former times, the bricklayers had the most craftsmen. Since 2 or 3 years, the carpenter have to educate the most craftsmen in Germany. Building codes, they are complicated now because they are European and negotiated with 26 countries, but they become more and more timber friendly, and the market is completely open for timber construction, and there is a really huge demand. At the moment, I have to refer, there is a small danger because of extremely rising prices for timber materials, and here irresponsible behavior of big companies, which often prefer now fast money instead of sustainable development. That's a small danger I see, but without this, the market is completely open for huge timber constructions. Next slide. What I show you, that's brand new, that's an initiative which is promoted next week from the Bavarian State Ministry for Food, Farming and Forests. For a small explanation, in Germany we have 16, we call it Bundesländer, regions, and each region is more or less independent and has to be always number one, especially us as Bavarians. And therefore, we want to have the biggest and best initiative, climate protection through timber construction, which will be launched next week. And our minister, and I was happy to be part of this process to develop these goals. And maybe I show you the main content. Sebastian, the next slide. You see, if you want, you can have this presentation as a PDF and then replace Bavaria through Chile, and you had nice headlines for public policy. And the very long-lasting thing is climate protection is the mega topic of our future, and we have to tackle this challenge now. And I think the whole world has to tackle this challenge now. And so we will definitely come to more timber. Sebastian, next slide, please. What is the proposal for a 5-focus program? Financial incentives for sustainable timber construction. That means funding for CO2 storage, for the use of renewable raw materials. People get really funding for using timber for the CO2 storage capacity of the buildings. I think, Michael, that's a thing you mentioned in your English part of your presentation. Second is die staatliche Vorbildfunktion. The government should be the good example. Public buildings should be built in timber. The second is the Bavarian research and development agenda for timber constructions. We have still a lot of challenges to tackle. The timber construction developed in the last 25 years from single-family house now up to nearly skyscrapers. And so it's a development speed which is completely untypical for the building industry, which is normally relatively slow. In timber construction, we were relatively fast, and that means there are a lot of things to define and to research and to develop in a very short time. Then the qualification and the educational initiative. That means look for carpenters, look for engineers, and look for architects which are able to design and build timber constructions. And the fifth and the last focus is consulting and technological transfer. Next slide, Sebastian. Here you see the fundings which should be in this focus one. About 40 million euros per year for a country with about 11 or 12 million people. It's not too much, but so that's good. It's necessary for Germans because we often make things which are irrational only when we get funding, and so in this case, it's not irrational. It's very rational, and it's reasonable to do it. And funding for CO2 storage will help to promote this. And the thing will be, it's not for single-family houses, because we have the market shares in single-family housing is huge enough. In Germany, you mustn't, you don't have to promote it. The other thing is you have to promote condensation in the cities. You have to promote also a refurbishment, and you have to promote things which do not use at the moment space where no buildings are on it, because our German problem is we have about 80 million people living there in a space which is maybe, I don't know which part of Chile. So we are a relatively dense populated country, and we have to save the space, the nature. Okay, next slide, Sebastian. I think you can read this yourselves. Next, Sebastian. Yeah, and here you see that's the story which should be told from our government, and I think which is a good story to tell. Climate change, climate protection through the use of sustainable forest. That's also always a discussion in Germany. Forest, the use of the forests. What is it? I'm searching for the English word. Untouched forests and forests which are used for forestry. And we have to tackle these challenges, because we need our forests for sustainable forestry. The next thing is dwellings in urban areas with additional stories on it. We want Bavaria should be the innovation leader in Germany or in Europe. We need to have, and it's very reasonable to have regional value change for a regional value change for a regional business. And there should be, we call it in German, Städtebau. There should be always good Städtebau, good architecture, and because buildings are not only systems, buildings are built environment, and people have to look at that. They have to fit into the environment, and that's always, architecture is always and ever first, and the other things have to follow. Okay, next slide. What can be success factors and recommendations? So that's my personal opinion. What could be done? The main thing is, for me, people ecosystem. Look for a system to educate skilled workers for the factories and for the building sites. This will bring you to a really new level. It's also, we worked a lot in the UK a couple of years ago. It's also, Michael will maybe he will confirm me. That's also a problem, partly in the UK, also in France. You have too less skilled workers, and this is not good for the quality of the buildings. So that's, for me, a main recommendation: establish a system to educate skilled workers. It's there is a blueprint how to do it, and I think it's really worth to copy it to other countries.
Alexander,
Yeah.
Alexander, we only have 5 minutes left, or a couple of minutes more maybe, but we really are very interested in what you are mentioning now about people and ecosystem. And because previous session, we were talking about the German model, how you educate children from when they are kids, that they are very in love with wood and the timber construction. So maybe you can go a little bit forward how you do now with the new generation, millennial generation, that they promote that the interest in order to be focused on timber construction and deal with the wood, education, in technical education, university, and maybe at the beginning at the school education.
They go to school in Germany. They go 9 years to school, or 10 or 13, depends, and then they choose a profession which they want to learn. And as at the moment, as a timber construction industry, we are relatively attractive, and so they choose to learn carpenter. And it's a 3-year education, which is partly in school and partly in the company. And so they get the complete education, and at the end they have to make their Prüfung. What is it? An exam, and so
Okay.
they are examined carpenters.
Okay.
And later on they can do their master, whatever, or they can go to university or whatever. But the basis is this education as a carpenter with the exam as a carpenter. Mm-hmm. And it's a mix between school and working in the companies.
Like dual education.
Dual education, yes.
Okay.
That's the one thing. The next is establish also R&D for timber construction in your national universities. Mm-hmm. In order to get also the engineers and the architects which are familiar to timber, which are passionate engineers. You also need passionate engineers. To promote timber, you need passion. The economists, they follow later. And what's also a thing for me, promote SMEs, people with knowledge, vision, and passion. They should have a chance to form their own companies and to create own companies, not the small and medium companies make a broad market. And always promote timber construction is active climate protection. Establish a funding system for the CO2 storage for timber buildings, or a CO2 tax on materials, and develop a value chain in the country from the forest over the raw material to highly prefabricated timber buildings, a regional and a sustainable value chain. That would be my recommendation, because we are working with the best material on the world, and we have a tradition which comes from the Holy Joseph, which is more than 2,000 years. Concrete wasn't found as people lived already in timber houses, and give young people the passion to work with timber, and we all will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Abrimos espacio para preguntas y respuestas hacia Alexander, o quizás también Sebastián Hernández tenga unos minutos para poder complementar o cerrar alguna idea de la presentación.
Of course, so what I'd like to say here is that first, I think the situation which Alex described in the beginning is relatively comparable to the situation in Chile now. So 30 years ago, timber construction had also to be developed in Germany, and that was the intention to show that at that point. And the other is that Alexander has had a foot in the private sector, as you saw, and also he has been part of and very influential as from Proholz in the formulation of this public policy, which if you see, and you'll be able to read it later when we can share the PDF, focuses in these 5 areas and is relatively simply formulated, you know, in these 5 pillars, but I think touch precisely on those points that are required to kind of foster timber construction in the future. And I think that's a really good thing of this public policy, which will be released now. It has not been even made public here in Germany yet. That it includes the vision of people like Alexander, who have been very much and very strongly involved in the private sector too. No? So they have agreed on these 5 pillars, relatively light or simply formulated, and I think they will be successful precisely because of that, of the coordination and the talking within different people with different backgrounds to formulate it.
It's not too difficult. It's only the thing is only starting.
Sebastián, la creación de esta instancia que nos están comentando ahora es una mesa multisectorial también, liderada desde el gobierno o desde el sector privado.
No, this is the state of Bavaria, okay, the Ministry of Forests, Food and Economy. Maybe Alex can help us, and maybe Alex can help us a bit how the ministry organized this initiative.
It's a multi-sectorial initiative, or becomes from the public sector, or it's been driven by the private sector, Alexander?
It's only from the public sector.
Okay.
So the ministry, 3 ministries give the money. It's public money.
Okay.
And it will be organized not from from lobby. Some things will be organized from lobby organizations as the consulting and these things, but that's the good thing. It's a really public thing which we told them we need this, and it's time to do these things. And from time to time you have the chance that even ministers listen to timber guys. And that was one of these chances we had.
Okay, we don't have any time to rest, but we would like to thank you both, Alexander and Sebastian, for this presentation. We will be very happy if you can share with us this PDF presentation, and also we are going to be happy to receive more information about this program. And I also would like to thank Eduardo Wigan and Michael for being here today. We'll be in contact with you once we need to go deep further in each of these topics. Muchas gracias a todos por hoy día. Entiendo que no hay preguntas desde el panel, así que estoy agradeciendo a nuestros invitados y vamos a compartir la presentación que nos ha hecho Alexander, que nos ha hecho Eduardo y Michael. Y vamos a también pedirle más información sobre los papers y sobre este programa específico que nos cuenta Alexander y Sebastián esta tarde. Si no hay más preguntas o alguien más que quiera tener comentarios, cerramos la sesión de hoy. Les agradecemos a todos su participación. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Alexander. Sebastian, thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to send you a couple of emails in order to ask you for the presentation. Thank you. Adiós a todos. Bye. Gracias, Eduardo. Que tengan buen fin de semana.
Well, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
La grabación se ha detenido.